Hi. If you're on this channel, you know that I'm Don Clore and that I normally do long-form jazz with a trio, bass player and drummer. But this is the start of a set of reviews of software piano instruments, commonly referred to as VSTs, which I guess is as good a name as any. So why am I doing this? I have a real Steinway B right here, a real piano, very fine piano. And but virtual pianos still matter to me because you can't carry this thing on your back and take it to the gig. And some gigs, quite a few in fact, are going to require bringing your own piano, having some sort of digital piano. Well, like many players of a certain age, I grew up hauling a Fender Rhodes electric piano around in the 70s, 80s. Later, a Yamaha CP70B electric grand piano. These are 300-pound monsters, maybe 250 pounds anyway. Later, Yamaha KX88 with the Roland MKS20. And just various sampled digital pianos of various ilk that were always disappointing in some way and difficult to play like a real instrument. I would say that through that whole period that the closest thing to a real piano was the Yamaha CP70B, and it was a poor substitute for a real piano, although a great instrument in its own right. So Modern D by VILabs caught my attention because they really devoted a lot of sample resources to it, and they just said this is the best piano that anybody's ever done. Not sure that's true, but let's take a look. How am I playing it? Well, I have a Kawai MP11 SE sitting here in front of you. You can't see it, but you'll see it in the side views, the B-roll stuff. And I'm using it to drive a Mac Mini with a M4 Pro, 48 gigs of RAM and 4 terabyte solid-state drive, so it's pretty beefy. And using an RME Babyface Pro. I'm running that at 32 samples so that we get really very low latencies. And the piano plays virtually like a real instrument. So this is not a laboratory test. What I'm going to do is play the instruments for you. Then I'm going to play the real thing and talk about what appeals to me about this instrument and what doesn't. I'm not going to do an exhaustive list of all the features, all the knobs and things you can do, because mostly I don't use them. And I don't think, to be honestly, I don't think they're mostly needed. I think that out of the box, Modern D gives you a pretty good experience. So this thing can be hosted in either the free, there's a free player you can host it in, or there's also UVI has a product called Falcon, which is a paid product. And I think it might be a little more stable than Falcon because Falcon gets more development love. So that's what I use. So yeah, it's a little absurd comparison, right? Because the real Steinway B is less than 6 feet away. I'm just going to turn to the left and it's right there. But let's just play this thing a little bit and give you some impressions. What is it about this thing that struck me when I first played it? So just for a moment, I'm going to play the real thing. So as you can see, it sounds a lot like the real thing. The big limitation, as always, is the reproduction amplification. Right now I'm running it through a set of 4 IK Media MTM iLoud near field monitors, which are reasonably accurate monitors. So the thing that, what I hear when I hear digital pianos is I hear I hear metallic sounds, and they get brighter. Sometimes they're just voiced so bright. They're always the phrase, the aphorism is cuts through a mix, which that's great if the piano's like just a side instrument, is not the main thing that's going on. But that's not true of the music that I want to do. The piano is going to have a bass and drums, and or maybe solo, and I need it to sound like a piano. And I'm used to the real thing. So I would posit that making something brighter than it normally is, just so it cuts through a mix, is depriving you of all the experiences that you can get from the piano, all the beautiful sounds. My piano technician that I used to use in Seattle when I was living there, Doug Wood, refers to the Steinways as this wonderful drug that we play. So I look at it as two scales. There's the metallic axis and the wood axis. And what I hear when I play this is cabinet being activated. I hear the wooden cabinet being activated. So the touch and dynamics of it, well, you can tell the dynamic range of a software piano like this is still vastly inferior to the real thing. The softest I can play this right now is about, and whereas you can play the real piano very, very soft. VILabs has gone to a great deal of trouble to add unicorda samples to the thing, but they eat up a lot of RAM when you do it. They have multiple mic positions and so forth, and I use all three mic positions. And in fact, right now I'm looking at it. I've got I've got ones over the hammers and off to the sides and so forth. And if you use the unicorda samples, they eat up a lot of RAM, and you can't really run the thing at the lowest latency settings because the streaming buffer they use is just too small. So no matter how you tweak the buffer in the player, you're going to have more latency. So I've opted to have less latency and not have the unicorda samples, although the unicorda samples sound pretty good. That's probably a tougher thing than doing mezzo forte and fortissimo. Okay, so what I'm going to show you now is very briefly go over the screen of Modern D. You can see how has pedal resonance and undamped resonance and other things, and probably the most interesting of the bunch to me are those three knobs at the lower left, which are tone and timbre and width. And I not the width so much, but tone and timbre. So my position is that, controversial or not, is that you can take a digital piano that sounds like a piano, and it's not overly bright, and you can make it as bright as you want. But it's very difficult to take something that's already extremely bright and then bring it down and make it mellower. It's really hard to do. So I'm hooked up with a little MIDI controller, a Fader Fox MIDI controller, and I'm going to tweak the tone. You can get to just unbearable levels of brightness. I would never play it like that, but that's just, it's got, you can go all the way there. We can also go very, very dull, very, very mellow. I find that a little less nerve tangling than the really bright sound, but I like it somewhere in the middle. And, when I'm playing with a band, when I'm playing with bass player and drummer, if I need to make it a little brighter, less so to be heard, because I'm going to be heard when I just have these three instruments and I have control of the volume, but less so I don't want to walk on the bass player. So I'll brighten it up just a little bit. And then I also use some techniques when I record the thing in Logic, and do some special techniques to kind of use dynamically cut frequencies where the bass and the piano are competing for the same frequencies. And I might show that technique in another video sometime, but because it adds to the clarity of the mix. Modern D also has a pretty nice reverb in it, and it's... And then it has some resonances. You can kind of dial up the... So, you know, that's something probably best used in moderation also. So touch and dynamics, it's pretty good. I mean, you can smack it and you can spank it and it sounds right. You can play it softly and it sounds pretty okay. So what do I like about it? Well, it can hold its own as a solo piano. It can do well enough. You have to be careful with it in the lower ranges, like in the kind of the tenor area, where you have to be careful with the, I actually more like 200 to 500 hertz, that you don't walk on the bass. And that's where sometimes I might choose to brighten it up, or I might even use a different piano that I'm going to review later that is also marvelous and might sometimes be a little better for working with the group. But this one has more of the kind of harmonic movement and density and motion and color and personality that a real piano has. They've sampled a really fine D, Model D Steinway, in a very fine studio, and just spent ridiculous amounts of, I don't know, it's got 18 gigabytes of samples or something like that. So what do I not like about it? Well, that probably the limited dynamic range, but I think that's a limitation in current technology. I just think that the, you've got whatever the sample rate is running of the, it's just the amplification chain itself has limited dynamic range. That's just the nature of the beast. So this is the best thing I've found so far, and the thing that I feel like can hold its own much better than other digital pianos that I played and have. I mean, behind me, I sit in a Roland RD2000EX that has their V piano modeled pianos, and this Kawai MP11 SE has some really fine sample set of the Shigeru Kawai SKEX, but none of them quite reach the level of woodiness and authority and personality and motion in the liveness in the harmonics that this piano does. So who's this for? Well, obviously you can record with it. I don't record with it. I use this guy right here. It's good for jazz players. I would think it would be good for classical players. I think that classical players that find themselves using like a hybrid piano or some other digital piano and are compromising to use it, I think might find this, because it throws more resources at the problem. And home studio users, I think, can use it. And, believe it or not, I think gigging musicians can use it. I know I am. And, there's a, actually my case is a little unusual in that I'm an ex-software engineer, so I'm not scared of carrying a PC around on the road with me. I've done it before. It doesn't frighten me in the slightest. In fact, I'm more worried about, back in the 80s when I carried around a sequential Prophet 5 and Prophet T8, that scared me a lot more than carrying around a Mac Mini, a modern Mac Mini, M4 Pro, which is just practically bulletproof. I turn off the Wi-Fi, shut the radios down, and it's just an appliance. I'm very careful about how I update it, and it doesn't require a great deal of expertise, so it's very robust. So that said, I think this is a good. My rating for this thing is 5 out of 5 stars in that it's the best thing going yet. I think it has limitations. There's other software pianos that I use for other scenarios that do some things better, and I'll get into that in later reviews. But it's worth every penny. And it's very stable inside of the Falcon player. So that's all I got. And I hope to see you again when I review the next software piano. Okay, thanks.